So today what we're going to be working on is dividing complex numbers, and that part of that is rationalizing the denominator. So I'd like you to put me on pause and do the try this and then come back and check your answers. Okay, so for number one, we want to rationalize the denominator. I have a monomial in the denominator. So I'm going to multiply top and bottom, numerator and denominator, by the square root of 6. So the square root of 2 times the square root of 6 is the square root of 12. Over 2 times the square root of 6 times the square root of 6 is 6. So let's simplify the numerator. So that's the square root of 4 times the square root of 3. So that's 2 the square root of 3. Over 2 times 6 is 12. And then 2 and 12 reduce to 1 and 6. So it's the square root of 3 over 6. All right, let's take a look at B. Okay, so for B, I have a binomial in the denominator. So I'm going to multiply by the conjugate. The conjugate of 2 plus the square root of 7 is 2 minus the square root of 7. Okay, so I distribute the 4. So I get 4 minus 4 the square root of 7 over, so remember when we multiply conjugates, the middles will cancel out. So I have 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times negative the square root of 7 is negative 2 the square root of 7. And 2 times the square root of 7 is positive 2 the square root of 7. And then the square root of 7 times negative the square root of 7 is negative 7. So I get 4 minus 7, which is negative 3. Okay, so let's now talk about rationalizing the denominator when I have imaginary numbers in the denominator. So again, just like rationalize radicals in the denominator, it doesn't make sense to have them in the denominator. So I want to get rid of the I that's in the denominator. I want to make it a rational number. So to make an I rational, we could just multiply by I, the numerator and the denominator. So I get 5i over I squared. So now you have to remember, I squared is equal to negative 1. So I have 5i over negative 1. So that's just negative 5i. All right, let's take a look at number 2. 3 over 4i. So I don't need to multiply by 4i. I just have to multiply by I. All right, so I multiply the numerator and the denominator by I. So I have I and I. So I have 3i over 4i squared. So now remember, I squared is negative 1, so I have 3i over negative 4. So that's just negative 3i over 4. All right, so let's take a look at 3. So I'm going to multiply numerator and denominator by I. So now my numerator, though, is a binomial, so you have to make sure you distribute. So it's 2i plus 4i squared over 6i squared. So remember, this I squared becomes a negative 1. That I squared becomes a negative 1. So it's 2i minus 4 over negative 6. That we can actually simplify. So it's 2i over negative 6. 2i over negative 6 minus 4 over negative 6. So we have this here reduces to negative I over 3. And I have plus 2/3. Now you should rewrite this because it would probably say a plus bi form. So you should have the I at the back. So it'll be 2/3 minus I over 3. Okay, so let's flip it over and take a look at the binomials. Okay, so when we have a binomial in the denominator, just like when we had radicals in the denominator and it was a binomial, you multiply the numerator and the denominator by the conjugate. So the conjugate for the first one, which is 5 over 6 plus I, the conjugate is 6 minus I. So I multiply the numerator and the denominator by 6 minus I. So distribute the 5 in the numerator, I get 30 minus 5i over distribute in the denominator, so I get 36 minus 6i plus 6i minus I squared. So notice the middles cancel out. That should happen because they're conjugates. So then I have 30 minus 5i. So now remember, this minus I squared becomes actually plus 1. So that's over 37. And if it says a plus bi form, we should separate that to be 30 over 37 minus 5i over 37. All right, so let's take a look at 2. So I have a few binomials there. So the conjugate of 2 minus I is 2 plus I. So I multiply the numerator and the denominator by 2 plus I. So I distribute the 8. So I have 16 plus 8i plus 2i plus I squared. Over, distribute the denominator, 4 plus 2i minus 2i minus I squared. So you can hear my clock is going off again. And just so you know, it's 11 o'clock right now that I'm working on this, 11 o'clock at night. So, so let's continue this. In the numerator, let's combine like terms. So I have here 16 plus the I squared, which is going to be minus 1, so that's going to be 15. 8i plus 2i is 10i over 2i minus 2i cancels, minus I squared becomes plus 1, so that's over 5. And now I do need to reduce this. So it's 15 over 5 plus 10i over 5, which is 3 plus 2i. Okay, so let's take a look at the last one. Okay, so I have 1 plus 3i over 2 plus 4i. So I'm going to multiply by the conjugate of 2 plus 4i, which is 2 minus 4i. All right, so let's double distribute in the numerator. So I have 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times negative 4i is negative 4i. 3i times 2 is 6i. 3i times negative 4i is negative 12i squared. Over, distribute the denominator. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times negative 4i is negative 8i. 4i times 2 is positive 8i. And 4i times negative 4i is negative 16, sorry. Negative 16i squared. All right, so let's clean this up here. So I have minus 12i squared will become plus 12. So I have 2 plus 12 is 14. Negative 4i plus 6i is positive 2i over minus negative 16i squared would be plus 16. So I have 4 plus 16 is 20. And then negative 8i and positive 8i cancel out. So I have 14 over 20 plus 2i over 20. So 14 over 20 reduces to 7 over 10, plus 2 over 20 reduces to 1 over 10, so that's I over 10. Okay, so that's it, and we'll practice in class tomorrow. Have a good night.